I was born into a world that smelled of disinfectant and hope. My earliest lullabies were not sung by my mother, but by the hum of centrifuges and the rhythmic click of laboratory machines at Heliction Labs. My father built the company before I even took my first steps. For him, it was never just a business. It was a crusade. For me, it became the landscape of my childhood, a place more familiar than any park or playground. I can still remember standing on a stool beside his desk, too short to reach the polished surface, drawing pictures on scraps of unused paper while he worked late into the night. I would sketch birds and trees while he sketched molecules and double helices. Every so often, he would pause, lean over, and show me something extraordinary under the microscope. "Do you see this, Bella?" he would whisper, as though letting me in on the universe's most intimate secret. That strand of DNA is like a sentence in a story, and if we are careful, if we are brave, we can rewrite it so the ending changes. Imagine what that means. To me, it meant magic. To him, it meant saving lives. He was Dr. Robert Carter, the man who believed that children dying of rare genetic diseases deserved more than pity and more than the indifference of corporations chasing only the biggest markets. He always said, "If we do not fight for the smallest voices, we do not deserve to fight for anyone at all." Heliction Labs grew quickly under his vision. Reporters called him a pioneer, a visionary, sometimes even a madman. Families called him a savior. But in the quiet moments at home, he was simply Dad. The man who forgot to eat dinner unless I reminded him, the man who fell asleep in his chair with papers scattered on his chest, the man who packed notes in my school lunches that said things like, "You are my greatest experiment, Bella," and my greatest success. We did not live in a mansion, though we could have. Our house was modest, comfortable, filled with books and cluttered with notebooks that smelled faintly of ethanol and ink. My father despised luxury. He drove the same car for over a decade, wore suits until they frayed at the cuffs, and mocked the idea of vacation homes. "If I am remembered only for how much money I made, then I failed," he used to say. "The real currency, Bella, is time. Time given back to children who would otherwise lose it. Time restored to parents who thought they would have to say goodbye." By the time I was a teenager, I no longer thought of Heliction as just his company. It was ours. I spent summers there, shadowing researchers, washing glassware, asking too many questions that no one seemed to mind answering. When my friends went to parties, I went to the lab. The other kids thought I was strange. Maybe I was, but I felt alive when I slipped on a lab coat and watched cells divide under a microscope. Later, when I entered university, I carried his discipline with me. Genetics became my obsession, my inheritance in every sense of the word. I earned my degrees, fought for my reputation, and made sure every accolade had my name and not just the shadow of my father's. He insisted on that. "You must be Isabella Carter, scientist," he said, "not just Robert Carter's daughter." When I finally earned the title of Director of Research at Heliction, he handed me a gift I still keep locked away. It was an old fountain pen, the one he had used to sign the company's very first charter. The barrel was scratched, the nib worn, the kind of object no one else would notice. But when he pressed it into my palm, his eyes shone. "Use it to sign discoveries, not deals," he told me. "Let others worry about profit. You focus on the work." That pen became my talisman. Whenever doubt clouded my mind, I held it and remembered what mattered. One evening, not long after my 35th birthday, we stood together on the balcony of his office. The city stretched out below us, veins of light glowing against the darkness. He rested his hands on the railing, his face weary but proud. He looked at me in that quiet, thoughtful way of his and said, "Someday this will all be yours. Not the building, not the money, the mission. Can you carry it, Bella?" I laughed then, trying to shake away the seriousness of his tone. "Of course, Dad, we will carry it together." If I had known that night would be one of the last times I would hear his voice, maybe I would not have laughed. Maybe I would have answered differently. Maybe I would have said, "Yes, I will carry it, even if it crushes me, even if it destroys me, because you are worth it." But I did not say that. I smiled, I teased, I believed there would always be another tomorrow. That is the cruelty of life. You never realize how fragile tomorrow is until it shatters in your hands. Looking back now, I see that everything he did was preparation. Every lesson about patience, every lecture about ethics, every warning about the predators who circle visionaries like vultures. He was not only teaching me science, he was teaching me how to survive in a world that would rather devour dreamers than follow them. At the time, I thought I had years to learn. But soon, far too soon, I would discover that inheritance is never just about bloodlines or signatures. It is about betrayal. It is about ambition. It is about how far you are willing to go when the world tries to steal what is rightfully yours. And it is about how far I would go when they came for mine. The morning the news came, the sky over the city was clear and cruelly blue. I remember thinking how bright everything looked as I brewed my coffee, how normal it all felt, until the phone began to ring. It was Alina. Her voice was trembling in a way I had never heard before. She did not even say hello. She only whispered, "Isabella, turn on the television." The screen flickered with images I will never forget. A mangled aircraft, smoke curling like a dark flag against the sky. The ticker at the bottom scrolled his name, Dr. Robert Carter, presumed dead in plane crash over the Alps. For a long moment I could not breathe. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor, spilling coffee across the tiles. I pressed both hands to my mouth, as if I could hold the scream inside. But grief is stronger than silence. It tore out of me in raw sound. The days that followed blurred together. Reporters camped outside my apartment, their microphones like bayonets. Journalists called Heliction a kingdom without a king, a ship without a captain. Investors panicked. Stock prices plunged. And through it all, I moved like a ghost, shaking hands at the memorial, receiving condolences that meant nothing, because none of them would ever bring him back. The funeral was held on a gray afternoon, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. I stood at the edge of the grave as the casket was lowered, my hands numb, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break apart in my chest. Friends of the family gathered in clusters, whispering platitudes. Employees from Heliction filled the rows, their faces a mix of genuine sorrow and carefully practiced sympathy. And then there was Victor Langley. He approached me with a face carved in solemnity, his silver hair immaculate, his tailored suit immaculate, his hand extended like a politician greeting voters. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "I want you to know that the board will do everything in its power to protect your father's legacy." His grip was firm, too firm, the kind of handshake that felt more like a test of strength than a gesture of comfort. His eyes did not match his words. They were sharp, calculating, as though he were already assessing the battlefield. I remember feeling a shiver run through me even as I forced myself to nod. After the ceremony, I found myself alone at the graveside. The crowd had dispersed, the air smelled of damp earth, and I whispered to the coffin, "I don't know how to do this without you, Dad, but I'll try. I swear I'll try." 3 weeks later, I learned what trying would truly mean. The boardroom was colder than usual that afternoon. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the skyline, the city gleaming under the sun, but inside the air felt suffocating. I took my seat with quiet confidence. I was the director of research, the heir to Heliction's vision, the daughter of the man who had built everything. Surely, I thought, this meeting would be about continuity, about honoring him by continuing the mission. I was wrong. Victor sat at the head of the table, a position he had slipped into with unsettling ease. Around him, the board members avoided my gaze. Their silence was thick-heavy. "Isabella," Victor began, his tone smooth as glass, "we need to discuss your role at Heliction." I straightened in my chair. "My role is clear. I am director of research, and with my father gone, I am prepared to assume more responsibility. I know the labs, I know the projects, I know what this company stands for." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Brilliance does not always equal leadership. You are extraordinary in the laboratory, no one denies that. But leadership requires vision. The kind of vision that extends beyond formulas and microscopes." I glanced around the table. Faces I had known since childhood, people who had eaten dinner at our home, who had toasted my father at company anniversaries. One by one, they nodded, murmuring phrases like market stability and shareholder trust. Their words were velvet around knives. Victor leaned forward, folding his hands. "The board has unanimously decided that you will step down from your position, effective immediately." The words slammed into me with physical force. I opened my mouth to protest, but my throat was dry. You can't just erase me," I whispered. "It is not erasure," he said smoothly. "It is protection, for you, for the company. You will, of course, retain your inheritance, your shares, but leadership is a different matter." Security appeared at the door, silent and watchful. My cheeks burned as I realized what was happening. They were not asking me, they were expelling me. I rose, my legs unsteady, my pulse hammering in my ears. "This is not the end," I said, my voice breaking but loud enough for all of them to hear. "You may control this room today, but you do not control the future. Not mine, not Heliction's." No one responded. Their silence was worse than insults. I walked out, escorted by men in dark suits, past colleagues who refused to meet my eyes. I felt humiliation burning across my skin, but beneath it something colder took root. Resolve. That evening I sat in my car outside my apartment, gripping my father's old notebook, the one I had grabbed from his office before they could throw me out. The pages smelled faintly of ink and his cologne. I pressed it to my chest and whispered into the darkness, "They think they've won, Dad. They don't know me at all." It was that night, with grief still raw and fury sharpening into clarity, that I decided. I would not fade away. I would not be the girl they escorted out of the building. I would become the woman who returned to take it all back. And when I returned, I would bring fire with me. For weeks after the boardroom ambush, I lived in a haze of anger and disbelief. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, searching for some sign I had missed, some betrayal that should have been obvious. The truth was that the betrayal had been there all along. I had simply been too loyal, too blinded by trust to see it. Heliction was not just a company. It was my father's heart, poured into glass walls and humming machines, and they had stolen it from me while the earth was still fresh on his grave. The first time I saw my name in the newspapers after the dismissal, I felt something inside me break. Heir to Heliction ousted by board. The articles framed it as inevitability, a necessary shift for investor confidence. They called me inexperienced and emotional. They said I was unsuited for leadership, that my brilliance was confined to the lab, not the boardroom. Some even implied I was unstable. It was a smear campaign, perfectly timed, and I knew exactly whose hand guided it. Victor. One night I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by clippings, my father's notebook open beside me, his words swimming in my vision. I whispered aloud, "You warned me, Dad. You always warn me about men like him." Victor had been my father's protege once. I remembered him in our home when I was a child, laughing at my father's jokes, clapping me on the shoulder like an uncle. I trusted him, we all did. And yet, behind that practiced smile, behind the carefully polished shoes and silk ties, he had been plotting. The betrayal was not just personal, it was professional. My father had trusted Victor with access to projects, to finances, to vision, and he had used that trust as a weapon. The day I realized how deep the treachery ran, I was sitting in my car outside the Heliction Tower, staring at the glass facade I could no longer enter. A colleague slipped into the passenger seat. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he pressed a sealed envelope into mine. "I should not be doing this," he whispered, "but your father believed in you. You should see what they are hiding." Inside were copies of financial transfers, shell companies, hidden accounts. Millions siphoned away from research into shadows. At the bottom, Victor's signature gleamed like poison. I clenched the papers until my knuckles went white. It was not just betrayal. It was theft. He had stolen from the science, from the patients waiting for cures from my father's dream. That night I sat in the dark, the city's lights flickering beyond my window, and I made a vow. Not whispered this time, but spoken aloud, my voice steady and sharp. "You have taken everything from me, Victor. My father, my company, my dignity, but I will take it back, every last piece. And when I do, you will regret underestimating me." The vow burned like fire in my chest. Still, rage alone would not win this war. I needed strategy. I needed allies. The first call I made was to Daniel Hayes. Daniel had been my friend since university, a restless genius who had traded the lab for the digital frontier. Where I studied DNA, he studied firewalls. Where I pipetted samples, he wrote code that could slip through the tightest locks. He picked up on the first ring. "Bella," he said, his voice warm but wary, "I saw the news, I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Be ready, I need you." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "I figured this day might come. What are we breaking into?" "Heliction," I answered. "Everything they tried to bury, my father's files, his research, his secrets. I need to know what Victor is hiding." Daniel whistled low. "That's not a small job. I don't care how big it is, I only care that it's possible." He was silent for a long moment, then he said, "Meet me tomorrow night. Bring whatever you have, we'll start with that." As I ended the call, I felt the first spark of hope since my father's death. For the first time, I was no longer drowning in grief. I was preparing to fight. But hope has a cruel way of mixing with fear. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I dreamed of my father's voice. He was whispering my name, over and over, like he was trying to warn me from beyond the grave. When I woke, the notebook lay open on my chest, as if it had something more to tell me. The betrayal had cut me down, but from that wound, something else was rising, something sharper. I was no longer just the heir. I was becoming the avenger. The night I met Daniel again, the city was wrapped in a thin mist that blurred the streetlights and made every shadow seem alive. We chose a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the booths were cracked and the coffee tasted like rust, but no one asked questions. He was already there when I walked in, his laptop open in front of him, a half-empty mug steaming by his elbow. Daniel had not changed much since university. His hair was still unruly, his shirt wrinkled, his smile tilted with mischief. But there was something sharper in his eyes now, a watchfulness honed by years of slipping into places he was never supposed to be. "Bella," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "You look like hell," I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its bitterness. "I feel like it too." He closed the laptop and leaned forward. "Tell me everything." So I did. The accident, the funeral, the boardroom coup, the smear campaign, the stolen research funds. By the time I finished, my throat was raw and Daniel's expression had hardened into something that looked like fury. "Victor Langley," he muttered, shaking his head. "I always knew that man smelled like rot under his cologne. So what's the plan?" "I need to know what they've buried," I said. "What they tried to erase after my father died. I think he left something behind, something important." Daniel drummed his fingers on the table. "If it's there, I'll find it. But once we start digging, Victor's people will know someone is sniffing around. Are you ready for that?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I've been ready since the day they threw me out." That night, in his cramped apartment filled with humming machines and wires like veins across the floor, Daniel showed me the first glimpse of what lay hidden. A folder deep inside Heliction's servers, encrypted, scrubbed clean. Its title made my breath catch. Phoenix Protocol. The name meant nothing and everything all at once. I remembered hearing it only once before, years ago. Late at night, my father had been working in his study when I wandered and half asleep. He looked at me, smiled faintly, and said, "One day, Bella, the phoenix will rise, but not yet." I thought it was just a metaphor, one of his cryptic ways of talking about research. But now, staring at the empty folder, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Someone wiped it," Daniel said. "But not completely. Ghost data leaves fingerprints. If I can trace them, maybe I can recover fragments." "Do it," I whispered. The next day, I received a call from Alina Ruiz, one of my father's oldest colleagues. Her voice was strained, urgent. "Isabella, we need to talk, not on the phone, somewhere quiet." We met in a cafe on the far side of the city, a place that smelled of strong espresso and desperation. Alina looked older than I remembered, her face drawn, her eyes darting to the door as if she expected to be followed. She slid a small drive across the table with trembling hands. "Your father gave this to me a month before the crash," she said, her voice cracking. "He told me to keep it safe, to give it to you if anything ever happened." My chest tightened as I gripped the drive. "Did he say why?" She shook her head. "Only that there were things Victor could never be allowed to touch." When I returned home that night, Daniel was waiting. We plugged in the drive together. Inside were financial reports that made my stomach churn, millions siphoned from research into offshore accounts, shell corporations leading back to Victor and his allies. Proof of corruption enough to shatter his reputation if it ever came to light. But there was more. A video file. The screen flickered, and my father's face appeared. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but his eyes burned with the same fire. "If you are watching this, Bella," he began, "it means I am gone. Do not trust Victor. He has betrayed everything. Protect the Phoenix Protocol. It is the future, and it is the only way to save them." The message ended abruptly, leaving silence thick in the room. My hands shook as I pressed them to my mouth. Daniel sat back, his face pale. "Bella," he said softly, "whatever this Phoenix thing is, it's bigger than we thought." That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing my father's voice on repeat. Protect the protocol. Save them. Who were them? Children, patients, humanity itself. All I knew was that the battle had shifted. It was no longer just about reclaiming Heliction. It was about protecting something my father had died to keep safe, and I would not let Victor bury it. The flash drive with my father's message changed everything. Until that night, my fight had been about vengeance and dignity. But once I heard his voice urging me to protect the Phoenix Protocol, my mission shifted. It was no longer just personal. It was a responsibility, one I could not ignore. Daniel leaned over the cluttered desk in his apartment, papers and cables spilling across every surface. "You need more than outrage, Bella. If you want to take back Heliction, you'll need control. And the only control that matters is ownership. Shares. Shares. The word rang in my mind like a drum. My inheritance gave me 22%, enough to make me a nuisance but not enough to change anything. The board still held the majority, and Victor had already seduced several institutional investors with promises of quick profits. "I need 75%, I said quietly, my hand resting on my father's notebook. "That's the threshold in the bylaws. With that, I can call for a control reversal and remove them." Daniel raised his eyebrows. That's a lot of ground to cover. Then we start small. That night, Phoenix Biogen was born. On paper, it was nothing more than a shell company registered under layers of anonymity. In practice, it became my mask, the vessel through which I would buy back pieces of Helixion, bit by bit, so quietly that Victor would not notice until it was too late. At first, the numbers seemed impossible. Shares scattered among minor investors, hospitals, pension funds. But I remembered what my father had taught me: small voices matter. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, those voices will join into a chorus. I began reaching out, cautiously at first. Old contacts who had supported my father when no one else believed in him, families of patients who owed their children's lives to Helixion's early therapies, retired scientists who still carried loyalty in their bones. The meetings were clandestine. A quiet conversation in a hospital corridor, a whispered deal in the corner of a library, a dinner in a backstreet restaurant where I kept my voice low and my eyes on the door. Each time I laid out the truth. Victor is preparing to sell Helixion's crown jewels to Orion Farm. If that deal goes through, the research will vanish. Children waiting for treatments will be left with nothing. My father's vision will be erased. Some looked away, afraid. Others shook their heads, convinced there was nothing they could do. But many leaned in, their eyes fierce. They remembered my father. They remembered the promise of Helixion. And one by one, they agreed to transfer their shares into the shadow network I was building. Back in Daniel's apartment, we tracked the numbers on a whiteboard. 22% grew to 28, then 34. Each green mark was a victory, each red mark a reminder of the fight ahead. Victor, of course, was not idle. The press began to whisper stories about me, that I was unstable, that I had stolen research data, that grief had driven me into paranoia. They painted me as a dangerous woman clinging to power she did not deserve. The smear campaign deepened, but every insult only fueled me. Each article I clipped and pinned to the wall, not as a wound, but as a weapon, a reminder of what I was fighting against. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, I sat with Alina in her kitchen. The air smelled of chamomile tea and fatigue. She placed her hand on mine and said, "Your father believed you were stronger than you know. He once told me you were the only one he trusted to carry the protocol. He was right." Her words steadied me. For the first time, I felt not like an orphan clinging to scraps of legacy, but like a leader forging something new. By the end of that month, Phoenix Biogen held 42%, almost double what I had started with. Still not enough, but it was momentum. And momentum, once it builds, becomes unstoppable. Late one night, as I studied the whiteboard crowded with numbers and names, Daniel leaned against the wall and said, "You know, Bella, you're playing a dangerous game. If Victor catches wind of this, he won't just smear you in the press. He'll destroy you." I looked at him, my father's pen clutched between my fingers, and answered, "Then let him try. He thinks I'm still the girl he escorted out of the building. He doesn't realize I'm the woman building an army in the shadows." That night, I fell asleep at the desk with the pen resting beside me. In my dreams, I saw a phoenix rising from ashes, wings blazing against the dark. And when I woke, I knew the seeds had been planted. Soon, the fire would spread. Momentum is a dangerous thing. It can feel like the wind at your back, pushing you forward faster than you thought possible. But it can also make you reckless, visible, a spark that grows into a flame others cannot help but notice. By the time Phoenix Biogen controlled 42% of Helixion's shares, whispers had begun to spread inside the company. Employees I had once worked beside started sending me messages through encrypted accounts. Some were simple words of encouragement, others more daring. "We still believe in you. Victor is killing the soul of this place. Tell us how to help." At first I hesitated. To involve them meant risking their jobs, their futures. But the truth was, I could not do this alone. I needed eyes inside, voices that could carry news from the corridors of Helixion that were now closed to me. So I began to meet with them, always in secret, always in places Victor would never think to look. A barbershop after hours, where hair clippings still littered the floor. A subway platform between trains, words exchanged in the rush of footsteps. A bookstore's dusty basement, surrounded by forgotten novels. One by one, the network formed. Alina called them the hidden flames. Sparks scattered across the company, ready to ignite at the right moment. They fed me reports of Victor's meetings, Orion Farm's advances, the shifting loyalties of minor board members. Daniel built secure channels where information could flow without leaving fingerprints. But the deeper we dug, the clearer it became that Victor was not blind. He could feel something moving in the shadows, and like any predator, his first instinct was to strike. The smear campaign escalated. Articles accused me of financial misconduct, of sabotaging Heliction's labs after my dismissal. Anonymous sources whispered that I had become obsessed and unstable. Investors grew skittish. For every 2 steps forward, I risked being pushed 1 step back. Then came the warning. A junior scientist I trusted, Claire, showed up at one of our meetings pale and shaking. She had been called into Victor's office, questioned about her loyalties, about whether she had spoken to me. "He knows," she whispered, her hands clutching the edge of the table. "Or at least, he suspects. He has people watching the labs, watching us." That night, for the first time, fear crawled beneath my skin. Not fear for myself, but for them, the people who still believed in me, who risked everything to pass along scraps of truth. I could not let Victor destroy them the way he had destroyed me. I gathered the hidden flames in a safe house Daniel had secured, a narrow apartment above a shuttered bakery. The air smelled faintly of flour and dust. They crowded into the room, a dozen faces lit by determination and dread. "This fight is dangerous," I told them, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "Victor will come after you. He will threaten you, smear you, maybe even fire you. If you want to walk away, do it now. No one will blame you." Silence filled the room. Then one by one, they shook their heads. Claire spoke first. "I watched your father fight for patients who had nothing. I watched him stand up to men who said cures weren't profitable. I can't walk away now, not when Victor is undoing everything." Elena placed a hand on my shoulder. "We are here because we believe in you, Isabella. You carry his fire." Their loyalty was humbling. It also terrified me, because loyalty like that demanded victory. After that night, I began to operate with sharper caution. Meetings staggered, routes changed, devices checked twice over. Daniel built firewalls inside firewalls, encryption that could turn a message into static if intercepted. We became shadows within shadows. Still, danger has a way of seeping through cracks. One evening, Daniel intercepted a message flagged from Heliction's servers. It was a report addressed to Victor. The words chilled me. "She is building something. Shares are moving quietly. Employees whisper in corners. Recommend increased surveillance. Recommend containment." The report was unsigned, the name redacted, but I knew what it meant. Someone inside the hidden flames was not loyal at all. There was a traitor among us. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I thought of my father's words, "Never forget why we do this." The why had never been clearer. But the how, the path forward through betrayal and deception, was darker than ever. Still, even as fear gnawed at me, another truth burned brighter. The flames had been lit. And even if one turned against me, the fire would spread faster than Victor could stamp it out. The first article hit like a slap across the face. I was drinking stale coffee in Daniel's apartment when the headline popped onto the screen, "Disgraced heir accused of data theft." My photograph filled the page, my eyes caught mid-blink, making me look both guilty and unhinged. The piece claimed I had stolen confidential Heliction files after my dismissal, that I had compromised sensitive research out of spite. Anonymous sources painted me as a reckless woman incapable of accepting her father's death. It was Victor's work. His fingerprints were all over it. Polished phrases, weaponized insinuations, a narrative designed not to prove but to poison. Within hours, other outlets picked it up. By nightfall, my name was trending, dragged through digital mud. Strangers called me a thief, a fraud, a spoiled child clinging to power. Investors panicked again. Some of the smaller shareholders I had courted began to waver. I wanted to scream, to throw something against the wall and watch it shatter. But rage, I had learned, was a luxury. Strategy was survival. "Let him smear you," Daniel said, tapping furiously on his keyboard. "The more desperate his lies, the more cracks he reveals. People notice patterns." "He's turning the world against me," I muttered, pacing the room. "Then turn the world against him." It was Elena who suggested the counterattack. She still had contacts in the medical community, doctors, parents, journalists who remembered my father's relentless fight for patients. "Victor can control the board and the media," she said, "but he cannot control the people who saw your father save their children. Let them speak." So we started whispering our own truths. Leaks carefully timed. Financial records slipped anonymously to investigative reporters. Stories of patients whose treatments had stalled because research funds had vanished. Rumors of Victor's meetings with Orion Farm executives in hotel bars, his voice caught on grainy recordings, speaking of streamlining profit and burying unmarketable therapies. It was not enough to win, not yet, but it was enough to muddy the waters. The first time I saw a headline swing in my favor, I almost cried. Questions arise over Heliction's finances. It did not name Victor directly, but it was a crack, and cracks spread. Victor responded with more venom. New articles called me delusional, accused me of manipulating grieving families, of fabricating documents. The press had become our battlefield, words and images our weapons. And in the middle of it all, the Phoenix Protocol hovered like a phantom. Daniel had managed to recover fragments from the wiped folder, sequences of genetic code, encrypted notes, equations that hinted at something extraordinary. We could not piece it together yet, but the fragments were enough to prove one thing: my father had been on the edge of a breakthrough, something far beyond the therapies Helixion currently sold. Victor wanted it buried, and I began to understand why. The more I studied the fragments, the clearer it became: this was not just research. It was revolution, but the war for perception was brutal. Some nights I sat alone, staring at the glowing screen as strangers dissected my life in comment threads, their words slicing deeper than they knew. She's crazy. She's greedy. She's nothing without her father. I would close my eyes and hear his voice, never forget why we do this. That why became my anchor. I began to play the game more boldly. I leaked not just evidence but narratives. I arranged for sympathetic journalists to discover Victor's offshore accounts. I timed announcements of new share acquisitions to coincide with rumors of his corruption. I learned to weaponize whispers the way he did. One evening, as another exposé aired on television, Daniel turned to me and said, "You're learning fast, you're becoming him." I flinched. "No, I'm becoming stronger. There's a difference." Still, his words haunted me. Because the line between strength and corruption is thin, and fire, once lit, does not ask who it burns. By the end of that month, the narrative had shifted. I was no longer just the disgraced heir. I was the defiant daughter, the whistleblower, the woman unafraid to challenge Helixion's golden idol. Victor was still powerful, but his shine was tarnishing. And beneath the surface, my shares continued to grow. 42% became 49%, nearly half. The whispers were becoming fire. And lies, no matter how loud, could not smother a blaze forever. It happened on a night when exhaustion pressed down on me so heavily I could barely keep my eyes open. Daniel was still awake, hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen carving hard shadows into his face. I had fallen asleep on the couch when the sound of his voice jolted me upright. "Bella," he whispered. His tone carried that electric edge I had heard only a few times in our friendship, the sound of discovery. I found it. I stumbled over, my heart already pounding. On the screen, a recovered file blinked open. Phoenix Protocol. This time, it was not empty. Lines of code scrolled by, sequences of DNA glowing like galaxies written in letters instead of stars. Annotations in my father's hand appeared in scan fragments, equations, sketches, notes scribbled with restless urgency. At first it was too much to comprehend. But as I read, the pieces fell together and my breath caught. Was a therapy? No, more than a therapy. It was a system, a framework to rewrite entire sections of human DNA with precision beyond anything I had ever seen. Where CRISPR had once been a scalpel, this was a brush capable of repainting the canvas of life itself. Target: congenital metabolic disorders. Target: childhood immunodeficiencies. Target: mitochondrial collapse. These were diseases that stole futures before they began, and here, in my father's notes, was a way to stop them. Not patch, not delay, cure. My hands trembled as I pressed them to the screen. "He was so close," I whispered. "He was right there." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Bella, this is world-shattering. If Victor buries this, billions will be lost, generations. He can't be allowed to. He won't." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "I won't let him." Later, I sat alone with the files spread across the table, my father's handwriting staring back at me. And I remembered his final words on the video: "Protect the protocol. It is the future. It is the only way to save them." Them, I understood now, not investors, not executives. Children, families, the forgotten, the people for whom science was hope and hope was slipping away. The truth seared through me. This was why he had died. The accident was no accident at all. Victor had known. He had seen the potential of the Phoenix Protocol, and he had realized that its very existence threatened everything he stood for, because cures are not profitable. Permanent solutions do not keep shareholders fed. If my father had lived, the world would have changed. If Victor had his way, it never would. Grief and rage fused into something harder, sharper. For the first time, I no longer felt like I was carrying my father's mission. I felt like I was carrying his torch. And torches are meant to burn. The following days blurred into motion. I traveled in secret to meet with scientists my father had trusted, sharing fragments of the protocol. Their reactions were the same: shock, awe, disbelief giving way to conviction. "If this is real," one murmured, "then we are standing on the edge of a new age." But not everyone I approached was willing to help. Some were afraid, some were already under Victor's thumb, and some, I realized, were feeding him information. Every step forward felt like walking a razor's edge. Then came the proof that shattered the last illusion. Alina arrived at our safe house with tears in her eyes and a folder in her hands. "I wasn't sure if I should show you this," she whispered. Inside were documents, flight manifests, maintenance reports, insurance records. At the bottom, buried in bureaucratic jargon, was the truth. Victor had ordered the aircraft my father flew to undergo maintenance by a subsidiary company linked to Orion Farm. The same company had been flagged for safety violations months earlier. The crash had not been random chance, it had been engineered negligence. I felt my stomach lurch. My father's death was not fate. It was murder, dressed up as misfortune. That night, I stood on the balcony of the safe house, the city spread out beneath me like a constellation of lies. I gripped the railing until my knuckles ached and whispered into the wind, "I will finish what you started, Dad. And I will make them pay for what they did to you." Behind me, the recovered files of the Phoenix Protocol glowed on Daniel's laptop, lines of DNA shimmering like fire. And in that fire, I saw not only vengeance but rebirth. Numbers had never frightened me before. In the lab, they were comfort. Ratios, equations, sequences of DNA that fit together like a code. But in the world Victor had forced me into, numbers were knives. 49%. That was where I stood, so close to control, yet still a fraction away from true power. It was maddening. Every morning I woke with the number etched into my mind. Every night I went to sleep hearing it whisper like a taunt. Victor must have felt the pressure too. He struck back with precision, targeting institutional investors, promising them golden returns. He hosted glittering dinners in five-star hotels, painted himself as the savior of stability, the man who could keep Helixion profitable in a volatile world. I knew because the hidden flames told me. They described the speeches, the handshakes, the way board members fawned over him as if my father's death had erased their memories of who truly built the company. I countered as best I could. Phoenix Biogen acquired small blocks of shares wherever possible, sometimes only fractions of a percent, but each piece mattered. I traveled under aliases, met pension fund managers in quiet offices, pitched them not profit but purpose. I reminded them of Helixion's mission, cures for the forgotten. Some laughed in my face, others listened. A few signed. Every gain was a rush of victory, every loss a knife in my gut. Then came the boldest move yet. One morning, headlines screamed that Orion Farm had made an informal offer to acquire a controlling stake in Helixion. The market erupted, speculating on astronomical figures. Share prices spiked, tempting even loyal investors to consider cashing out. It was Victor's gambit, and it nearly worked. For 2 weeks, I fought desperately to keep my allies from defecting. Daniel spent sleepless nights tracking trades, flagging suspicious transfers, intercepting whispers of backroom deals. Alina worked the phones with tireless resolve, reminding wavering shareholders what was at stake. Still, the tide threatened to turn. At one point, my holdings dipped back down to 46%, and I felt despair gnaw at me. Was I foolish to think I could outmaneuver a man with endless resources and the ruthlessness to kill? But then, like sparks in dry grass, victories caught again. A medical foundation in Switzerland signed over their block of shares after reviewing my father's files. A quiet philanthropist in Canada pledged his support, saying, "Your father saved my niece's life. I owe him everything." Piece by piece, the puzzle shifted back into place. 52%, then 58, 61. The whiteboard in Daniel's apartment was crowded with numbers, arrows, frantic notes. Each time we passed another milestone, we stood in silent awe, hardly daring to believe. Victor noticed. His smile on television interviews grew tighter, his tone sharper. Behind the polished veneer, I saw the first hints of fear. He had underestimated me, but fear makes predators more dangerous. One evening, Daniel stormed into the safe house, his laptop under his arm, his face pale. "He's trying to freeze you out," he said. Victor's lawyers filed an injunction claiming Phoenix Biogen is a front for illegal market manipulation. If it sticks, the government could investigate. They could block your acquisitions. For a moment, the room tilted around me. If the injunction held, months of work could unravel. But Alina placed her hand on mine, steady and firm. "He's desperate. He would not risk this unless he knew he was losing. Fight it." So I fought. Lawyers were hired, arguments made, evidence presented that Phoenix Biogen was legitimate. It drained resources, energy, time. But in the end, the injunction collapsed under its own weight. Another of Victor's weapons blunted. The day we hit 70%, I allowed myself a smile. Not victory, not yet, but close enough to taste. And with each percentage, my resolve hardened. This was no longer about revenge or even about justice. It was about survival for the protocol, for the children it could save, for the vision my father died protecting. Victor still held the board, but I was building something stronger: ownership, legitimacy, power he could not dismiss with security guards or smear campaigns. The game of shares was brutal, bloody in its own way, but I was winning. And as I watched the numbers climb, I whispered to myself, "The fire is spreading, Dad. Soon it will burn them all." By the time my shares crept past 70%, the air around me felt charged like the sky before lightning strikes. Every conversation carried weight, every headline dripped with implication. The war was no longer hidden. It was out in the open, and the world was watching. The decisive shareholder meeting loomed just weeks away. On that day, control of Helixion would be decided. Victor knew it, I knew it, and the closer it came, the more dangerous he became. The first blow landed in silence. Daniel intercepted it, a contract buried inside a corporate filing, masked with legal jargon. At first it looked like an ordinary merger document, but when he decrypted the fine print, the truth hit like a hammer. Orion Farm. Victor had signed a conditional agreement to sell them exclusive rights to Helixion's next-generation genetic platforms, not just patents. Entire divisions. If the deal closed before the shareholder meeting, Orion Farm would own the bones of the company. Even if I won the vote, there would be nothing left to save. When I saw the contract, my stomach knotted. "He's gutting it," I whispered. "He's dismantling Helixion piece by piece, selling its soul before I can stop him." Daniel's jaw clenched. "He's burning the ship so you'll inherit only ashes." We spent days scrambling, calling allies, warning them of the betrayal. Alina reached out to physicians who had long relied on Helixion therapies, urging them to pressure investors against the deal. Daniel leaked fragments of the contract to journalists, framing it as corporate sabotage. The backlash was swift but not decisive. Victor shrugged off the reports with smooth denial, insisting it was preliminary exploration and prudent business planning. He smiled for the cameras, but I could see the cracks in his composure. The smear campaign against me escalated again. This time it wasn't just articles. It was whispers in boardrooms, dossiers slipped under doors, rumors spread with surgical precision. I was accused of everything from insider trading to emotional instability. One outlet even claimed I had forged my father's video. At night, I scrolled through the accusations until my vision blurred. Sometimes I felt myself wavering, the weight of their lies pressing down. But then I would open my father's notebook, trace the faded ink with my finger, and remember why I fought. The storm was not only external. Inside the hidden flames, suspicion spread like rot. The traitor who had sent reports to Victor remained unknown. Meetings grew tense, eyes darting, trust fraying. I felt the weight of leadership like chains across my shoulders. If one of them betrayed us again, everything could collapse. One evening, after another long strategy session, Alina pulled me aside. "Isabella, you're driving yourself to exhaustion. You can't fight every battle at once." "I don't have a choice," I whispered. "If I stop even for a moment, he wins." She squeezed my hand. "Then promise me one thing. When the day comes, you will not just fight for vengeance. You will fight for the mission, your father's mission." Her words anchored me, because in the fury and noise, it was easy to forget the heart of it all, the children, the Phoenix Protocol. The future that could be saved if I survived this storm. The night before the shareholder meeting, the city was restless. Rain lashed against the windows of the safe house. Thunder rolled across the sky, low and endless. Daniel worked at his laptop with frantic focus, securing the final presentations. Alina reviewed speeches until her hands trembled. I stood at the window, staring at the storm. My reflection looked back at me, pale, fierce, almost unrecognizable. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. Either I would reclaim Helixion and reveal Victor's corruption to the world, or he would bury me along with my father. I pressed my father's pen to my lips and whispered, "Guide me, Dad, one more time, just one more time." Behind me, lightning split the sky, illuminating the files of the Phoenix Protocol spread across the table. The storm outside mirrored the one within, and I knew, by tomorrow night, the fire would either consume me or consume them all. The morning of the shareholder meeting, the city felt unnaturally still. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets washed clean, but the air was heavy, charged, as if the storm had only paused to let us fight. I dressed slowly, deliberately. A dark suit, my father's fountain pen tucked into the breast pocket like a weapon. When I looked into the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She was not the grieving daughter who had been escorted out of Heliction months ago. She was Steele. The meeting was held in the grand conference hall of Heliction's headquarters. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers. Cameras lined the back walls, reporters murmured in hushed excitement. Investors, board members, employees, they all crowded into the room, their voices a rising tide of speculation. When I entered, a ripple spread through the crowd. Some turned away, whispering. Others met my gaze with something like respect. Victor was already there, seated at the head of the table. His suit was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expression carved into calm authority. But when his eyes met mine, I saw the flicker of unease he tried to hide. "Ms. Carter," he said smoothly, his voice carrying through the microphones. "I was not sure you would come." I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble. "Of course you were. You've spent months trying to bury me. But you forgot one thing, Victor. I'm my father's daughter, and I don't scare easily." A murmur rippled through the audience. The meeting began. Formalities, financial statements, projections, words droned like static while my pulse hammered in my ears. Finally, the floor opened for shareholder motions. Victor rose first, presenting his proposed deal with Orion Farm. He painted it as salvation, a lifeline of stability, an opportunity to secure Heliction's future. Applause scattered across the room. Then it was my turn. I stood, every eye fixed on me. My hands trembled, but I pressed them flat on the table, grounding myself. "My father built Heliction to save lives," I began, "not to feed the greed of men who value profit over people. Victor Langley wants you to believe this sale is survival, but it is betrayal. Betrayal of patience, of science, of every shareholder in this room." I signaled to Daniel at the back. The screens lining the walls flickered, and the first slide appeared, financial records showing Victor's offshore accounts, millions siphoned from research funds. Gasps echoed. More slides followed, documents, contracts, emails linking him directly to Orion Farm. Then came the recording, a hidden microphone captured weeks before. Victor's voice filled the hall. Robert was never going to let go. He had to be removed. Once he's gone, the protocol dies with him. The room erupted. Shouts, cries, the scrape of chairs against marble. Victor's face drained of color. "That's a lie," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. "Fabricated nonsense." But the evidence kept rolling. Maintenance reports tying the plane crash to Orion Farm's subsidiary. The fragments of the Phoenix Protocol, proof of a cure buried for profit. My father's final message, his voice trembling but clear: "Protect the protocol. It is the future. It is the only way to save them." When the video ended, silence hung heavy. I looked around the room, my chest heaving. "You have a choice," I said, my voice raw but steady. "Stand with Victor and you sell not just a company but a future. Stand with me and we bring Heliction back to what it was meant to be, a place where science serves humanity, not shareholders." For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then a hand rose. One of the oldest shareholders, his voice trembling. I cast my vote with Isabella Carter. Others followed, one after another, voices declaring, hands raised, the tide turning in a wave that Victor could not stop. When the final count was read, it was undeniable. 76%. Control. The hall erupted into cheers, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing like lightning. Victor stood frozen, his hands gripping the table as if it could anchor him. For the first time, the mask cracked. His eyes blazed with hatred, but underneath I saw something else: fear. Security entered, flanking him. Daniel had already triggered the final strike, a data package delivered to international authorities, freezing Victor's accounts, flagging his crimes. As they escorted him out, he turned back to me, his voice low, venomous. "You think you've won, Isabella, but fire burns everything, even the hand that holds it." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Then I'll burn, but I'll burn brighter than you ever could." The room thundered with applause as he disappeared through the doors. And in that moment, I felt the weight of victory settle on my shoulders. Heavy, yes, but mine. The day after the shareholder meeting, the world looked different. The sky was the same, the streets the same, but everything shimmered with a new clarity, as if the storm had passed and left the air cleansed. Heliction was mine. The victory should have felt triumphant, but in truth it felt heavier than I expected. Responsibility pressed down on me like armor. I had torn the company back from the grip of corruption, but now came the harder part, proving I could carry it, proving I was worthy of my father's faith. The first thing I did was walk through the laboratory halls again. It had been months since I was escorted out under the eyes of guards. Now, as I stepped through the glass doors, employees stopped what they were doing. Silence fell, then applause. It started with one pair of hands, then another, until the sound filled the building, echoing off steel and glass. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I held my head high. "We are home again," I told them. "Not because of me, but because of us, because we never gave up." That evening, I convened a press conference. Cameras flashed, microphones jostled, reporters shouting questions. I stood before the world and announced the truth. "Heliction Labs is under new leadership," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "The corruption is gone." And today, I am proud to announce that my father's final work, the Phoenix Protocol, will move forward. I saw the ripple spread through the crowd. Gasps, scribbling pens, the murmur of headlines being born in real time. "The Phoenix Protocol represents hope for families who have none," I continued. "It is not a product to be hidden, not a profit line to be sold. It is a cure, and it will be made available to those who need it, not only those who can afford it. That is my promise as CEO." The applause that followed was not just polite. It was thunderous, a roar that felt like vindication. In the weeks that followed, we began the work of rebuilding. The hidden flames stepped into the light, no longer whispers but leaders of a renewed company. Elena took charge of research teams, her steady hands guiding them with both rigor and compassion. Daniel became our guardian in the digital realm, protecting Heliction systems from the kind of corruption that had once nearly destroyed us. Investors wary of idealism began to see results. The fragments of the protocol were tested, verified, expanded. Early trials showed promise beyond even what my father had envisioned. Patients who had been written off began to stand, to breathe, to hope. One morning, I walked into a ward where children were receiving preliminary treatments. Their laughter filled the air, bright and defiant. A little girl with wide eyes tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Thank you." I knelt beside her, my throat too tight to answer, and in her smile I saw my father's dream alive again. The symbol of the phoenix spread through Heliction. Employees wore pins shaped like rising wings. Murals appeared in the labs, painted in bold strokes of red and gold. It was not just a company anymore. It was a movement, a rebirth. Late one night, when the building was quiet, I returned to my father's old office. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne, of paper and ink. His chair sat empty, but I could almost see him there, hunched over his notes, muttering equations under his breath. I placed the fountain pen on the desk, next to a framed photo of us taken years ago. My hand lingered on the glass. "They tried to bury you, Dad," I whispered. "But they didn't realize you had planted a seed, and now it's rising. I carried it for you. I'll keep carrying it as long as I breathe." Outside the window, the city pulsed with light, alive and endless. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not because the fight was over, but because the fire was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us. The phoenix had risen, and it would never be extinguished again.